Just as a preface, my talk today is going to be specifically for black and brown folks. So basically, if your people do not come from Europe, that's who I'm talking to today. So white folks, you're here to listen in and learn, but I'm really here to build with black and brown folk of how not to be tokens. And also we can apply this to other marginalized communities, whether you're queer, your different abilities, gender identity. They can apply of how to be a token. Specifically, my talk today is going to be about race. So I'm going to show a video. How many of y'all saw I Am Not Your Negro, the documentary about James Baldwin? It's not a shame if you didn't see it, because it just came out last year. Huh? I hated it. You hated it? Okay. We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah,
we can. Okay. You hated the documentary itself?
I love James Baldwin.
Okay, cool. Got you. The documentary is on Netflix if you missed it. Okay? So I'm just going to show a clip. This is actually a standalone clip. It's not the movie itself. I wasn't going to show the trailer. But this is James Baldwin, who is a gay black man who is a prolific writer. And unfortunately, most of the stuff that he said 50 and 60 years ago, it still holds true. There hasn't been a lot of changes in this country, particularly for black folks. So I'm going to play this video. Hope we got some audio, because I didn't double check it. Uh-oh. Uh-huh.
He's on it.
Yay, audio guy. Nope, that goes down.
Christian churches, which is black.
Got it. Okay, hold on. We're going to start over.
I don't know what most white people in this country feel. I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know it's Malcolm X on Spinach. It's the most celebrated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. This is a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobbyists are against black people, but I know the real estate lobbyists keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. I'm going to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you are showing exists in America, which I have never seen.
So, before we do, we don't close this all the way, because I don't want to keep going. So I was in the 60s, talking about white institutions. And we have removed ourselves, most folks, from religious institutions, although I acknowledge that some people might be still affiliated with religious institutions. I do interfaith work at the Catholic school, college in Kansas City. I've done work at a Christian-ish college. They don't like to call themselves Christian, they're Christian. And to do work and interfaith work is to include non-believers, which often happens in interfaith communities. So for the folk in the audience, we're already at questions, I'm kidding. So the folk in the audience, particularly black and brown folk, when you hear the term token, what comes to mind? Go ahead, popcorn style. I know y'all got big voices. Either in your own experience or things that come to mind. Got you in a drink.
White people. College.
A number?
Yeah. Basicness.
Basicness? Basic how?
Just like, it's basic to tokenize people to me. It's a basic form of and the basic form of trying to be inclusive, right?
Yeah.
It's to throw a black person, throw a brown person, throw a racially
ambiguous person.
Favorite, racially ambiguous person. And then everybody questioning if they black or brown or of color or not. And then you're like, damn. And then they're like, yeah, they're of color. That's tokenism to me, right?
Yeah. And then everybody asks, what are you? I'm a human, damn it. A couple other comments. Miss Pearl, what is a token to you when you hear that term?
Fly in the buttermilk.
Fly in the buttermilk, yes. Fly in the buttermilk. What else?
That's
I like that.
a way of keeping the wolves off of them. Yeah.
So if you get one token,
Pretend.
huh?
To pretend.
To pretend, right? It's very superficial. If we just include you on our panel, maybe even on our board, then everything's gonna be fine. If we just give you this check, everything's gonna be fine. Anybody else, what token means to you? I see you, hand in the back and on the side, yeah.
Me, it feels like you're using someone, like how people use like having like that token black friend to like maybe say the N-word, or like that token black friend to like wing themselves into like the black community.
Yes. For non-black folk, that's including non-black folk of color, don't ever twist your mouth to say the word. I'm gonna say it out loud because I'm black and I can't. To say the word nigger or nigga, whether you singing or not, ever. If you want to know more about that, watch Dear White People, episode 5 on Netflix. It's all about it. Over there, go ahead.
She already said it. The word I was thinking was instrumental.
Instrumental. You want to say a little bit more about that?
It's a tool. It's in service of something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about a token actually being a coin. When I was a kid, I go play games at the arcade. The token didn't have any value.
Mm-hmm.
Like I put the token in the machine so I could do what I really wanted to do, which is play the game.
Mm-hmm. You have access,
Right.
or perceived access. I like that. So perceived access, right? And it has to do with power, right? And so if someone that you involve, and folks that are not black or brown, I'm sure you could all think of a time, depending on part of your identity, that you felt tokenized. In a classroom, within your friends, your family, even within your organization, right? This happens all the time. It makes you feel very isolated, and it makes you feel like being a representative. And it's also like a coin, it's glittery, right? It's shiny, it's appealing. Well, why don't you want us to, but we've been, y'all seen Color Purple, Miss Millie? We've been good to you people. Why won't you do this for us, right? And so for black and brown folk, it's very appealing. If I don't do this work, who will? If I'm not on this panel, who will do it? And it's tempting. And I'm not saying to turn everything down. I'm not saying that, but don't jump at every opportunity, because when we tokenize folks, then one, we ask people to speak for an entire population. And not all, this is also, I'm giving y'all insight, black folks speak, not all kinfolk or skinfolk.
Right.
So there is a term called internalized racist oppression, and its counterpart is internalized racist superiority, IOR and IRS. And IRO has to do with the ways white supremacy plays out in communities of color. So what you learn about your own racial or ethnic background, black folk don't need white folk to hold us down if we think, you talk about the self-esteem, if we don't think we have it. If we don't think we have our own power. Colorism, light skin versus dark skin, right? Team light skin, I was like, don't ever do that. We got light skin privilege people, don't do it, right? How that plays out. Communities of color, there's anti-blackness in all communities of color, right? So the way anti-blackness plays out in indigenous folk, right? The Asian Pacific Islander community, Latinx community, right? As if black folks are not also within that community, and everyone is always pitted against black folk. So we don't need to fight against white folk if black and brown people are always fighting with one another, right? And it is very easy and tempting for us to take that position, and then we suddenly get into it. We could talk about diversity and inclusion, but what happens often, I've been in nonprofit worlds for 20 years, nonprofit industrial complex, is that we don't have the power to make change. And this particularly happens with queer folk and with women of color. We want you on our board, we want you to come in, but do those people stay? Does the structure, does the environment actually change? Or do we want people for their radicalism, their experience, their mouth, right? We want people to be the angry black person, but only so much. And if you push us too much, and you make us be uncomfortable too much, then what happens?
Go off on you.
Go off, or you get pushed out the door, or you leave.
Or you take power from within.
Or you take power, or you have a coup.
Yeah.
You organize.
Take that organization.
So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we talk about tokenizing, particularly folk of color. And those of you that are folks of color in this room and involved in secular organizations or other organizations, be mindful of when folks are asking us to do stuff. What are we getting in return? Are we sitting and spilling all of our beans and crying? This is emotional labor to come up here and tell my story all the damn time, right? What are we getting in return? Do I have access to power? Can actually change something? If I hear a suggestion, will something happen? There was a recent conference that I went to. I'm going to be nice and not name it, but you can easily Google it, in the last month. And there was a whole lot of racial justice going on within this conference. And a white woman got mad and said, I don't want to be told about said this to another brown person, who was a non-black person, which is interesting that she didn't come up to a black person and say something. I don't want to be told about my white privilege by an angry black woman, angry black man. Right? This was someone who has leadership in this organization. And is this stuff actually going to change within our organizations? And the way gender plays out within tokenizing folk. So I just wanted to bring this up. I know I don't have much time, and we're talking about tokenism. And I talked about internalized racist oppression. So I recommend looking up internalized racist oppression and internalized racist superiority, the ways in which our organizations, our structures, our country was built upon systems of white supremacy. And when I say white supremacy, I think many folk maybe not, I'm not talking about the KKK, the hood, right? I'm talking about liberal white racism. The idea that whiteness is on top of everything else. And that is embedded in our culture. It is embedded within our organizations. It is embedded to have hierarchies. What does it mean to actually flip the power structure that those that are the most marginalized actually have voice and power? Do you actually have community advisory boards? Or do you have the safe people that will tell you what you want to hear? That happens a lot. And then you wonder why other black and brown folk won't come in. It's because they know that person's been put in a position they actually don't have any power to make any changes. And another thing, internalized racial oppression, folks like to, particularly with the Latinx community and the Asian Pacific Islander community, bet to see it's like, oh, you're almost white. The proximity to whiteness and the ways that plays out within our organizing efforts, that we just fight with one another. And black and brown folk, we got a lot of stuff to do, right? And it's very tempting to fall into the model minority myth, which was a myth that was created in the 80s, right? So I look at model minority mutiny and talks about what it means to dismantle this within our own communities. So I only have a few minutes left because I want to actually have a dialogue at the end. So kind of some strategies, if you feel that people are, because now that I'm speaking a little bit in the secular community, I've done anti-racism work, I do HIV work, mixed race identity stuff, but I'm kind of newer to the secular community. As I'm finding people are calling on me, which is helpful, but I don't want to be that person that people are always calling on. So what can I do to make space for folks that aren't as feminine presenting as me? How do I make space for folks that are darker than me, that have more coarse hair than I do, right? That maybe aren't documented? I can sit here all day and make up this space, but how do I make space? Not even here at these national conferences, but back home for folks that don't look like me or more marginalized than myself. Because we can put safe Negroes on our panels all day long, but if all our folks are light-skinned, able-bodied, cisgender, what is that actually doing? It's surface-level tokenism. And so for the black and brown folks in the room, I really encourage you, like I said at the last panel, to connect with other folks that look like yourself at this conference. When you go back, I know y'all looking at each other. Folks you don't already know.
I don't know.
I just met her 5 minutes ago.
No, for real.
Connect with people outside of this, because for me, when I walk into a room, I always see who looks like me. And that is a white privilege to walk in and never have to see people that look different than you. I always go, how many people of color are in this room? It's my favorite game, and unfortunately I lose, and I barely make it to double digits half the time. And I live in Kansas City, which is 30% black, and you wouldn't know it, because it's so segregated. Not everything has to happen in formal relationships. You don't have to have a meeting all the time. particularly for Black and brown folks. Organizing is about relationship building, authentic relationship building. Not I want you on my board. I want to get to know you. What is your interest in this and what is my interest in this? I recommend looking at mutual interest and self-interest to identify if you really want to work with somebody or not. Just get to know people. Start showing up at events and don't expect to always have the lead in those events. Sit back and learn and listen. And particularly for folks, if you work in an LGBTQ group or a Black and brown group, what you can do is hold that space for your community, because we do not operate in spaces that are for us. And if you are not a part of that community, don't ask to come. Don't ask to come. I do Movement for Black Lives work in Kansas City. We have Black healing spaces that is raw, and every time we post an event, 4 white folks go, can I come? This is a Black healing space. The ways you can help, tell your Black and brown friends. Donate money. Those are easy things to do. But don't ask to enter our spaces. Just like if we're having a discussion about feminism and it's all women, men, you don't necessarily always want to come. I hope not, because that's not your space, right? Identify folks that you can actually bring into those other spaces. And then the last thing, because I want to actually have a little Q&A, is create space and partner with other organizations. So if you are kind of a few people, right? If there's only a few Black or brown folk, sometimes it might be like organizing with the pissy Christian folk, right? There's a lot of people doing faith-based work that are okay organizing with atheist, agnostic, non-believers, right? And so think about reaching across the lines. Now, if they're actually not down for you, that doesn't mean you have to do it. But think about partnerships in other ways and other than just staying in our bubble. And understand that this work takes time. There are people, Ms. Furr was talking about organizing out in the streets, and many people I'm out and about, and I'm like, how did I meet you? In the streets. And I met many people 2 years ago, particularly after Mike Brown. We're only 4 hours away from Ferguson in Kansas City, that I've seen time and time again, and they're now involved in other organizations. They weren't in that organization the first time, but they came out, I met them at a protest, and then I saw them again, and then maybe they didn't join our organization, that's fine, but they got involved and they're doing something. So just don't think you can come to like one meeting, one protest, and everything's fine. You gotta keep showing up, and like someone mentioned earlier, if you're not accepted, it's okay. Find another organization that works for you, or build your own organization. If you don't have anti-racist white folk in your community, start a conversation club about it. What does anti-racism mean in my community, in my book club, in my secular organizations? Do that work. Reach out to national organizations like Showing Up for Racial Justice. They have webinars all the time. Everyday Feminism, I was mentioning to somebody, is my go-to, because they have all different folks contributing to that. And they have workshops on talking about whiteness and how to be liberal white folks in this work and do this work and talk about whiteness, right? These are real conversations that we need to have. And I'm looking at my time, 51. So I got about 4 or 5 minutes because we got to end at 9. And I gave a lot to you in 20 minutes. I don't do PowerPoints. I kind of just speak off the cuff. So hopefully you're able to follow me. It's late. But questions, comments, inquiries. Does token mean something different to you now? Or if you've tokenized somebody, if you want to talk about that too. Yeah.
Hi. What would you say to a group that's still fairly young and has been stonewalled by some of the Black organizations on campus, namely the fraternities, sororities, and the NAACP?
I would ask why that happened.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, that's an offline conversation, but if it happened for multiple groups, it might have been somebody in an organization before you got there. It could have been the reputation of the organization. It could have been things that the organization was doing, and there wasn't conversation. So I would recommend, if you were involved when that happened, is to have an honest and reach out a hand and say, I'm here to listen about how we possibly screwed up.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean that. Stonewalling in terms of, so our SSA group has tried to reach out and try to do like cooperative activities. And oftentimes, some of those organizations tend to be led by religious leaders, and oftentimes we're not able to find that intersectionality the way that we would like to. And so I was asking kind of for advice in that situation.
Oh, you're talking about, well, I think also beyond Christian, I think it also has to do with racial lines. I think many Christian folk, and I can't speak for Christian folk because I'm not Christian, but many Christian folk will be a little bit more willing to move with folks if they don't have the same identity. So Muslim folk, other belief systems. So if your organization is majority white, which it could be, I would say, what did we do? What happened? Who screwed up? And listen, truly listen. And then give your plan of what you're going to do as your organization. Say, we'll get back to you a week. We're going to meet and we're going to talk about this. And make those changes and make a commitment to those changes. And talk about having like real relationship accountability partnerships with those organizations. Even if it's coffee, if it's checking in once a month. But if they have backed away, something has happened. And whoever has the closest relationship, engage in that. So I'm not saying a Jew or whomever, but whoever has that closest relationship, or a faculty member or a staff member, maybe the staff advisor. I'd recommend having someone being like a mediator in that as well. But yes, here and then back there. I got like 2 minutes.
No, I was like, thank you for like actually bringing up like interfaith working. Since I've been here, I've came here for work, and I really didn't. I'm not secular. I'm not religious, but like I don't know how I identify right on that spectrum. But since I've been here, I haven't really understood like what secular is, right? But I have also understood that so many people that I work with in my life are not like who are religious. And who do movement work are not, like, oh, what's your religion?
Yeah.
What you doing?
Okay.
And I work with Black and Brown, LGBTQ communities, and I have seen this interfaith work happen, right? And I've been like wondering, how do we like pull together that more, and like how do we talk about these traditions that also come from this Black organizing, right? Like Black organizing does come from the church.
Yeah.
Like as problematic as the Black church is, and we can get into like all day conversations about that.
Yeah.
I really want to like also honor that like religion plays a big role in how people come through.
Yeah, it's support network. It's how people get their food. It's how they get their transportation. It's how they get to the polls, right? So we could talk about religion. I got all my critiques of religion, but there's a lot of faith-based organizations that are also doing community organizing and providing social services that aren't out there in the community otherwise. So how can you partner on something beyond religion, on the basic needs that folks have? One more quick question, because we're out of time. Did you have your hand up back there?
Yes. So I think, and I guess I can't speak for everyone or even many people, but regarding having your own space, saying, don't invite yourself to these events that are run by Black organizations. This isn't necessarily your space. I think one thing that people like me may struggle with is we don't see, of course, the same things that Black people experience. We don't participate in Black culture. That's just the fact of things. So, when is it appropriate to sit down and say, what is it like? What kind of things do you do differently? Like, we want to, see that little bit of window into what Black culture is like. What's the appropriate time to sit down and talk about that or engage?
I would say, one, after you have a true relationship with somebody, don't have that be your leading question. And also, Black culture is everywhere. Black culture is consumed by white folk all day long. Black music, Black entertainment. So there's a lot of stuff out there written by Black folk. I recommend blogs, video blogs, and then start having relationships with folks. But if you just go in teach me about your ways, our ways are out there, right? They are out there. And so if you're trying to enter a space for Black folk, like I said, invite other Black folk to it and say, instead of why can't I come or can I come, how can I be helpful? And leave it as an open-end question and accept that answer. And then I would also recommend working with other white folk to unlearn our racist white history. Do that study group with other white people and how that is engaged in our culture and our schools. Okay, y'all, I'm out of time. Thank you. This is where I'm gonna talk to you after I see your hands.